The emergence of Abraham Lincoln. Here we go. In 1858, a seat in the United States Senate from the state of Illinois came open for election. In 1858, a seat in the United States Senate from the state of Illinois became open. The reason it came open is because someone had served their term and they now needed to be re-elected. And that person was Senator Stephen Douglas. We talked about him before. So Senator Stephen Douglas's seat in the Senate comes open because he served his term and he's going to choose to run for re-election. Okay, what is his political party? Do we remember? Yeah. Democrat. He's a Democrat. So Senator Stephen Douglas would be running for re-election to the Senate as a Democrat in 1858. To oppose Douglas in this election, the Republican Party's going to nominate, at that time, a little-known Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln is going to challenge the more powerful Stephen Douglas for this Senate seat in Illinois. Now these guys were almost the polar opposites. Lincoln was seen maybe as kind of shy, whereas Douglas was very bold, very aggressive. Some people might say even a little bit arrogant. Okay? Lincoln a little bit more shy. Lincoln was born in Kentucky. He grew up very poor. He, like Andrew Jackson, received no formal schooling as a young child. So Lincoln's born in Kentucky. He grows up poor. He receives no formal schooling as a young child. And he didn't start out to be a Republican. He actually moved to Illinois when he was 20 years old. And what party did he join? What? The Whig Party. Yeah, so he moved to Illinois when he was 21 years old. And he soon joined the Whig Party. And he actually was elected to the Illinois state legislature in his early 20s. Who's someone that represents the Wyoming state legislature right here in Worland? That was elected to that. Mike Greer? Is he in the legislature? Same type of thing. So Lincoln moves to Illinois at 21, joins the Whig Party, and he actually gets elected to the Illinois state legislature in his early 20s. Well, he had good luck as a legislator, so he decided to run for the House of Representatives in Congress representing Illinois, and he was elected and served one term in the House. So after being elected to the Illinois state legislature in his early 20s, he had some success there, got some notoriety. He decided to run for the House of Representatives and was elected and served one term. After serving that one term, he set his sights on the Senate, which is actually pretty common for people to do. Usually they start as a member of the House, then they run for the Senate. Not always, but it's fairly common. So he runs for the House, he's elected to the House, he serves a term, and he decides that he's going to... Girls, what do we got going here? Just abbreviate it to work just fine. Now, this is kind of interesting because during this important Senate race, Lincoln, the supposedly shyer of the two, challenges Douglas, supposedly the more seasoned of the two, to a series of debates, which is really kind of bold on Lincoln's part. So during this Senate race, Lincoln immediately challenges the polished Douglas to a series of debates. And you know, Douglas was known as probably the best debater of the times, not only in Illinois, but nationally. He was very good at debating. And people thought Lincoln was just crazy to challenge this polished Douglas to debates. So they scheduled 7 debates between August and September of 1858. So Douglas eagerly accepts Lincoln's offer to debate, and 7 debates between the two were scheduled from August through September 1858. So they actually had those 7 debates in just a short period of time. Now, politicians and historians compared the opposite characteristics of these two. So picture this in your mind as they're going to debate each other. Douglas, well-groomed, well-polished, stocky figure, bullish voice. So picture that in your mind. You've got Douglas, very well-groomed, looking good, feeling good, well-polished, well put together, real stocky, short and stocky guy with an absolute bullish voice, convincing voice. Then you got Lincoln, lanky, tall, wearing baggy clothes and unshined shoes, and actually spoke in a high-pitched, somewhat feminine voice. So they were actually the polar opposites when they got together for these debates. Again, write down what you want. Douglas, well-groomed and polished, stocky figure, bullish voice. Lincoln, lanky, tall, wearing baggy clothing, unshined shoes, and actually a high-pitched, somewhat feminine voice. This was the matchup in this debate for the Senate. Well, debates are funny, and we'll give you some great detail on the Nixon-Kennedy debates when you're in here next year, because who decides who wins? The people that watch. And whatever that means is it means whoever they're maybe most impressed with, they go to the polls with. So nobody knows who won the Lincoln-Douglas debates, but Douglas did go on to defeat Lincoln in that Senate race. So I think Lincoln fared pretty well. If you look at history, he probably fared pretty well against Douglas. But the people, I think, were more interested in Douglas's experience, and so he defeated Lincoln in the Senate race. So Lincoln, although he lost the election, what did he gain? Experience, but what else? Popularity, publicity, and some admiration, because he even took this guy on in these debates. So Lincoln got himself some notoriety, some publicity, and some press, so to speak, and he really established himself with his courage because he had challenged the seasoned Douglas. Now, interesting enough, this is going to be a prelude to the presidential election of 1860, which we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. Okay? So Lincoln, this great showing that he had against Douglas will allow him to give him another shot for the presidency in 1860. Okay, that will take us to our next subtopic then, which is John Brown's raid at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. This is what you were talking about yesterday. This is what he is on trial for during that movie we'll watch. John Brown's raid at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. Now, John Brown's already made one tragic contribution to the issue of slavery in the United States, right? Well, in October of 1959, he's going to make a second tragic contribution to the issue of slavery in the United States. Remember, John Brown was the guy that in Bleeding, Kansas, gathered a group together along with his sons and murdered 5 anti-slavery men. Remember that? Well, in October of 1859, he gathers his group together. This time they have 18 members. So it was Brown and 18 followers, 19 total. And they sat down and put together a 4-part strategy of what they were going to do. So John Brown gathers together a group of 18 followers. So it's he and 18 followers, including, again, his sons. And they put together a 4-part strategy. This is something they're going to do. And the strategy will make that evident. Okay, the first thing they're going to do in this 4-part strategy is they're going to attack the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. They're going to attack the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. Keller, what's a federal arsenal? Yeah, where the federal government stores weapons, ammunition, etc. And Brown's first part of his 4-part strategy is going to attack that federal arsenal. And you go right in with number one when he attacks it. This is still on number one. What's he going to do? He's going to attack it and seize what? The weapons, yeah. He's going to seize the things that are in the arsenal. So he's going to attack and seize the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. He's going to attack and seize the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry. Number two, once he does that, he's going to arm the slaves that he believes will flock to his side and become part of his group. Okay? Second part of his strategy, he's going to arm the slaves that he's confident are going to flock to his side and join his cause. Does that make sense? Did anybody think that?
So, he is against.
He's an abolitionist. He's against slavery. Yep. Against slavery. So he's going to arm these slaves that he believes is going to flock to his side because he's on their side, right? Third part of his strategy is he's going to establish a black government in the mountains of Virginia. He's going to establish a black government with all these slaves that flock to his side. He's going to establish a black government in the mountains of Virginia. And who are they going to serve? Who's going to be the leader of this government? He is, okay? So he's going to attack and seize a federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, number one. He's going to arm the slaves he believes are flocked to his side, number two. He's going to establish a black government in the mountains of Virginia, number three. And he's going to be leading that government. And number four, he's going to train those blacks, and he's going to take his followers, and he's going to wage his own private war against the South. That's his plan. He's going to train these blacks in the mountains of Virginia. He and his followers are going to take those blacks, and they're going to wage their own private war on the South. That's his four-part strategy. Well, number one somewhat worked. He did attack the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry. He did attack that federal arsenal. But number two didn't work out so well for him. So what's that mean? No slaves flocked to his side. So Brown and his followers attacked the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, but to his surprise, no black slaves joined in his efforts. Well, after his attack of the federal arsenal, he's met by U.S. Army troops who are not going to let him do that. So he meets resistance by the United States Army, ironically led under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee. So John Brown and his men are met with resistance by the United States Army as they try to attack this federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, and he is attacked by U.S. Army troops under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee. Well, it doesn't take long for Colonel Lee and his army to trap John Brown in a railroad house next to the arsenal. They force him to retreat into a railroad house near the arsenal. And after a 2-day fight in which 10 of Brown's men were killed, he surrendered to Colonel Lee. So Colonel Lee and the Army meet John Brown at the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. They force Brown and his followers to retreat into a railroad house near the arsenal. They fight it out for 2 days, and finally, after 10 of Brown's men were killed, John Brown surrenders to Colonel Lee. And as mentioned yesterday by Mason, Brown was later tried and convicted of treason against the United States and was sentenced to death by hanging. And when we watch The Blue and the Gray, which is we'll talk about after our lecture on the Civil War, that'll be the first thing that comes out in the movie. Pretty much the first thing is the trial of John Brown and his hanging. Okay, so that'll make sense to you. Any questions on John Brown's raid at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. Okay, let's go to the election of 1860. I will guarantee you, you will have an essay question on your test like you did in which other election? 1832, right? Okay, so you can know there's going to be something kind of crazy here, okay? Well, the Democrats got together prior to the election of 1860 to try to pick a presidential candidate because their last one didn't work out so well, which was Franklin Pierce. Okay, so they're trying to get a presidential candidate chosen, and they're really split in their views. They're really split in their views on who they should choose. What's causing the split in philosophical differences? Slavery. Same thing as we're talking about. So the Democrats get together, they're split in their views. The issue of slavery is causing these philosophical differences. Obviously the Southern, yeah. Oh, thank you. It was, yeah. Will, thank you. Buchanan. Yeah, because we were ahead of that. Yeah, my fault. Perfect. Way to go, Will. So yes, they were not happy with James Buchanan. Now, the split's going to come by what? What's the difference in philosophy? So what's the split going to be caused by? Region. So the Southern Democrats are going to do what? Favor slavery. And the Northern Democrats obviously took the position that there shouldn't be slavery. But I got to give them credit. They did compromise, the Northern Democrats. They agreed to what? Concerning the issue of slavery. Popular sovereignty. So the South was totally against, or excuse me, the South was totally for slavery. The North, instead of being totally against slavery, allowed the issue of popular sovereignty. Northern Democrats thought that these particular territories and states should use popular sovereignty to decide the issue of slavery. Whereas Southern Democrats obviously just wanted slaves. Okay? So, the Democrats screwed up and they chose two different candidates for president. That never works. Because what do? Split the vote. Okay? So, the Democrats ended up choosing two different candidates for president. Who do you think one of them was? Familiar name? Stephen Douglas. So the Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas for president. Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas for president. Southern Democrats nominated Vice President under Buchanan, thank you, John C. Breckinridge for the presidency. So the Democratic Party splits and nominates two candidates in 1860. Northern Democrats nominate Stephen Douglas, senator from Illinois. Southern Democrats nominate Buchanan's vice president, John C. Breckinridge, for the presidency. Now the Republican Party also had two men in mind. But they weren't as divided, so they're not going to pick two. They're going to have to decide between two people for one nomination. Who was obviously one of those candidates? Abraham Lincoln. The other was Governor William Seward of New York. So when the election of 1860 came about, the Republicans weren't as split. Because where do most Republicans live? North. Okay, so they have no issue over slavery. They're fighting within their own party. So some Republicans prefer Abraham Lincoln for the nomination. Some prefer Governor William Seward of New York. Now, I think I've told you this, but I haven't. I'm going to explain it again. When you go to a convention to pick a candidate, and I'll just tell you present terms, and it was the same then basically, but there are less states. You start with the state, first state in the alphabet. And you're talking, picture this. So I'll just help you. I'll give you this scenario. 1960. John Kennedy was a possible nominee. Lyndon Johnson was a possible nominee. Adlai Stevenson was a possible nominee. Okay? Stuart Symington was a possible nominee. Hubert Humphrey. was a possible nominee in 1960. This is 100 years later. So they had 5 guys open trying to run for the presidency. Well, what happens is every state based on population has so many delegate votes. And at that time in election in 1960, in order to get the nomination, you had to have 761 delegate votes. And each state has so many delegate votes based on population. Now, if we're a state here, the state of AP US history, we have 26 kids in here. Okay, we'd have 26 delegate votes. Okay, Talon doesn't have to give his vote to the same person that Buck does, not in the nomination process. So typically they'd have a roll call. It's the first ballot, Democratic nomination. The great state of Keller Rogers gives his 3 delegate votes to the next President of the United States, Bill Bowman. Okay? Now, a state could say this: the great state of Keller Rogers gives 7 votes to Bill Bowman and 3 votes to Sally Ride. So delegates do not have to give their votes to the same person. But it takes 761 in 1960 to get the nomination. So you start with Alabama. Go all the way down the list. Alabama, the great state of the national champion, Alabama Crimson Tide football team, give their 37 delegate votes to the next President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. So they keep tallying this. They go right down the list. Who's the last state to give their votes? Wyoming. So John Kennedy does not have the 761 votes he needs prior to Wyoming. Wyoming is the last state to give their votes out. Because Wyoming gave Kennedy 23 delegate votes, that put him over the 761 he needed, and he became the Democratic nominee for president in 1960. What would have happened if Wyoming